Welcome back to Founders in the Field, the show where we go behind the scenes with agency leaders, consultants, and creative founders to show you how they're building, scaling, and staying sane in the trenches. I'm your host, Stefan Bradley, and today's guest is Pete Mills, co-founder of Smart Response. How are you doing, Pete?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure.
Let's dive straight in. For people who don't know your story, take us right back to the start of your journey. What made you get into the industry, and give us an overview of what your role looks like today.
Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me on. So I started in the direct response television industry in 1999, joined my family business, which most people seem to know, which is called JML, which was founded by my dad. He was the John Mills in JML. Who had been in the industry for going back to the 60s when it was all about live demonstration. And he then developed a video promotion business, which people will see in stores like Boots and Tesco's and Robert Lewis, place like that. And then I joined quite a small business, which was turning over about £5-6 million at the time. I had worked in PR before that up until about the age of 28, and then effectively joined my family business. And the unusual thing about JML is they did everything in-house. So we had full production facilities in-house. By the time it had grown a bit, once I'd been there for a while as their commercial director, we were launching about 100 products a year from scratch. So we'd source the products from China, package them, make a film for every single one of them, launch them into the market, test them, see how they went. And then if they did well, they'd roll them out. We were spending about £500,000 a month of the company money on airtime to drive that business. We had about 8,000 video promotions. We were licensing our products into about 80 different countries around the world with the products attached to them. And we had our own shopping channels as well on Sky, which unusually we ran with our own content. And again, completely vertical business. So we had call center, stock management, making the films, running the websites, the whole thing from top to bottom, run entirely by us. And then I left there. And then since that time, I've been running agencies offering the full service of direct response television advertising. By that, what I mean is we do full script to screen production. So we come up with the ideas for the products and services we sell. We do all the media buying and planning, specialist DRTV media buying and planning, and we do all the campaign analytics. So as I like to say when we're out pitching, we are fully responsible for our client success. And that's quite unusual because normally if you're a brand or a service and you want to use DRTV or get into it, you normally employ a media buying agency, a production company, and maybe a consultant. So we do the whole thing end to end. Founded this particular business, Smart Response Media, co-founded it with a lady called Hannah Bennett and a chap called Jonathan Fursey, who also worked at JML. So there's a real strong link there. But they actually worked there quite a bit longer than I did. And then it's the same principle. So it's production, media buying, campaign analytics. We founded it just over 10 years ago in 2015. And in terms of scale, to give you some idea, this year we'll turn over about £20 million, and we have a full-time staff of 12 people.
So it sounds like before you got into JML, you sort of tried to cut your teeth sort of in the industry, and then really got your teeth stuck right into it with JML and really learned the industry, and that's been able to then enable you to be able to take that into your own business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned, almost every day the skills that I learned at JML. It was a really fast growing business. My dad was a really very kind of accomplished and aggressive entrepreneur. So he grew that business at its height to 96 million turnover. 8 million EBITDA, employed 350 people, totally privately owned pretty much. He was the majority shareholder, but he was also one of those people who'd learned everything really through the school of hard knocks. So everything from accountancy through to writing adverts to media buying to product design to fulfillment to financial management to every aspect of it. He just knew it inside out. And so anyone who's worked with him, it's quite interesting actually, the DRTV industry has kind of spawned quite a few companies since obviously JML was launched, and most of the people who work in those companies at a senior level have got some touch point with JML and that they've worked there, and so he obviously passed on a lot of those skills. I couldn't have run agencies without that background, certainly in direct response television, because I wouldn't have known enough.
Yeah, no, and for my audience really from America or Canada, I'm not sure how they might know JML, but JML really took the industry by storm and sort of spawned its own advertising style.
Yeah.
And, it was really like UK culture. Like everybody knows their adverts and what they
Yeah.
sold because it really just was different to anything else that we were viewing on a TV.
Yeah, very much so. And well, what we did actually was when I joined, my dad was using a lot of US. I mean, DRTV is really from America. It was formed. What happened actually very briefly was that Ronald Reagan deregulated TV, and that meant that infomercials could run during the nighttime, and that then created this kind of industry that kind of formed, and a trade body was formed around it called the ERA, which was an international trade body for DRTV companies around the world. And my dad, and what was happening is we were importing US shows, they're called infomercials and DRTV spots. And actually, it wasn't working as well as we thought. And so, what JML was quite unique at doing was actually anglicizing DRTV, if that makes sense. So, using shot in the UK, because there's different format in the US. The broadcast format in the US is called NTSC. In the UK, it's PAL, which is a different look to how it's broadcast, but also just everything about it. So English voiceovers, English shot in English, properties, using English talent, and even English music actually. And so I think what we did successfully was we kind of created a DRTV anglicized brand. And then what we did was, through the success of the products that we would bring in, allowed us to then spend, half of it. I mean, one of the interesting things about JML is once we first started, we were spending 10 grand a month or something, and we built that very quickly up to £500,000 a month. And actually, JML still to this day is probably the most consistent advertiser in the UK, that it spends about £500,000 every month, and that's been since 2001. So 25 years or so of spending £6 million a year roughly on TV airtime. And what happened, interestingly, was we didn't ever set out. We were a sales business using TV as the medium to sell products, but we found after a period of time, because we incorporate the JML brand into everything, that we got a really loyal audience that we'd never really set out to do. And then interestingly, over that period of time, because there's such exposure going on all the time, and we had our own shopping channels and everything else to augment that, was that you just had this huge brand awareness. I remember after a bit, I worked for my dad about 8 years, and after about 6 years, we did a bit of research, because we never did research about anything really. And it came up just this, I think there was about 9 out of 10 people knew JML in the UK, which, is up there with kind of Marks and Spencer or something, but none of it was intentional. And interestingly, with the brands that we work with now, so we work with roughly about 25 brands, some very big ones and some small, and everything in between. And what's interesting about DRTV is you can make money from the front end with DRTV. That's what we really specialize in. But also what happens is, if you have clients, and most of our clients are on air every single month with us, is they start to build that brand awareness free of charge, really. So we're kind of replicating that again with the client base that we work with.
Also, I feel like JML, like the way the products and stuff like that were like, like how ecom is now, where they have like a nifty little gadget, that'll help you, that you don't actually think that you need, but then you see it and then you're like, oh, that'll be really handy.
Yes.
I feel like JML really cultivated that. And
It did,
and it made you like, when you see these adverts, you're like, I never knew I needed that.
Well, actually,
I mean?
that kind of 9 or 10 kind of selling points to it. It had to have a story. And it's interesting, we still apply that principle today at Smart Response. Unless we feel the story is strong enough, it just won't work. And what's really interesting actually about DRTV full stop is that, we see lots of clients. We specialize with two sets of clients. We specialize with people who have tried to do it before and it hasn't worked, or people who've never done it before and have kind of heard about what we do. But in both cases, to make it work, it's got to have a good story behind it, because otherwise, unless you get that attention that you're talking about, the whole name of the game, you've got to get people to buy now and today, and they will only buy into that if there's a compelling story behind it. But you're right. I mean, it's interesting, all the social media and TikTok and all that stuff. I think a lot of what they do is quite kind of goes back almost to those kind of original principles of kind of, I think people said to me that, you get 2 seconds or something in social media for people to get engagement. Thankfully with TV, it's a lot longer than that, but you have to do something kind of impactful, and DRTV is all about that.
Definitely. So Pete, what does your role look like today inside Smart Response?
So I am my role, my title is managing director, but really my job is about selling DRTV to acquiring new clients. And I also head up the media buying function in the company as well. But we have a very able, recently promoted director of media, a guy called Ed Gendon. So he works closely with me in terms of kind of setting up the media strategy and the deals and things, because that's very important to make the whole thing work. But my real job is out there to acquire new clients. So we are constantly, I learned that from my dad, no matter how well you're doing, you want to keep selling and keep acquiring new clients. And we're pretty good at that because our client retention rate is very high, and our stories are, our case studies are very strong, and we encourage new clients actually to speak to incumbent clients to understand exactly what we've done for them in terms of generating return on investment, which is, by the way, that's really all that's our primary interest here to, we try and make our creatives as attractive as possible, and we work with some very premium brands who are very concerned about the delivery of their content, which is key to make it all work for everyone. But yeah, my main role is, I would say, kind of heading up the media buying function, which is the vast majority of our turnover, but really selling the concept. I mean, one of the interesting things, Stefan, that people don't understand really with direct response television until they're doing it, is actually what we're really creating is a new direct sales channel for our clients. So going back to the JML thing, it's the same principle. We were using television as a means to make incremental profit in sales immediately. And by that, what I mean is that our adverts, interesting, are typically 3 minutes long, which nobody else does really. They have typically unique numbers, unique URLs on them, often QR codes. And actually, normally with our campaigns certainly within the first week, but often on day one of their airing, they start generating profit for our clients. And so what we do is we work on every single client we work with. We only require a month for a test. And within that month, we can establish 4 things really, which is, does it deliver a return on investment that the client requires so they can continue? Which channels work best, which day of week and which time of day. And then we have our own software that we've just launched actually about a month ago called SmartView. And what that does is that gets the data from the campaign. So for example, if an advert went out on, ITV3 at 2:00 this afternoon, we put an attribution window into that. So for, say, 10 minutes after the advert's aired, and then any sales and incremental website traffic that's been generated within that attribution window, according to GA and BigQuery, so we work at the back end of websites, not the front, we can then start to see very quickly what's working and what isn't. And as the month progresses, that data set becomes more mature, and then that allows us to make greater optimizations as we go into month 2. So we normally hit our target about a week to 10 days into the campaign launching. The data set increases, and as we go into month 2, and then with those optimizations by channel, by day of week, by time of day, we can normally make the campaigns work about 20-30% better as we go into month 2. So it gets more and more profitable. And with all of our clients, as mentioned, we've got about 25, roughly about 20 are on every single month with us. Some have a bit of seasonality in them, so they're not on every single month. And what we do is then build up their spend, making sure that we're delivering their cost per acquisition. And then, and we have some clients, by the way, who spend £30,000 a month on airtime because they're quite niche, and that's their kind of optimal return level. If they go higher, their CPA depletes. Whereas we have some clients who spend £400,000 a month because they normally have a broader range of products, and that is just their natural CPA. So they can spend that much more. But with all of our clients, we have what we call a diminishing return principle, where we build them up slowly. So even those ones who spend £300,000-400,000 a month, they'll have been working with us for at least a couple of years to have got to that point. Because what we don't want, Stefan, is that, this whole business is built on, when I was a client, and I didn't know much about DRTV right at the beginning, what you find with agencies a lot of the time is they're just pushing you to spend all the time. They've never sold anything in their lives apart from, brokering airtime. They don't know what the pain is of losing money. And, believe you me, I'm one of those people who've made a lot of money and lost a lot of money. It's very easy to get. The DRTV is a bit of a graveyard from people who get hubristic about their how much money they can spend. So we have a very cautious, what we call get rich slow approach, which is kind of just work your way up in small increments, and then you have happy customers. It's interesting. It's taken us a bit longer than we thought to get to this level, but I have to say we don't have clients along the way who kind of say, "Oh, why did we do that?" Whereas when I was a client, I mean, it was quite irresponsible. I found a lot of the media agency, and interesting, they all kind of do slightly the same thing. So We when we set up this business, it's very much with the client at the center of our focus. And we always say to clients, we are never pushing clients to spend more money. We wait for them to say this is working, and then we kind of work our way upwards.
It sounds like you've got like all the bases covered in the sense of being like nothing's left to chance.
No.
So that way, you can have like a full overview of what's working, why it's not working, and being able to articulate that to the client.
Exactly.
And I feel like that, even though you're saying it's get rich slower, but from a client perspective, they must be like, I know every part of this, why it's working, why it may not be working for any reason, and it's just so much more transparent. That's the word. There's so much more.
Yeah, you've absolutely got it nailed down. So we are all about transparency. So actually what we do with our clients, we do daily reporting. When they're in the test phase, we do weekly reporting throughout. And the whole thing, we really have nothing to hide as an agency, in the sense that we are very clear what, the way we go about things, and they have full access to everything. So, and I'd even go a step further than that we are the ones, if something's not working, we're the first to say, let's stop this now. Let's regroup, let's go at it again. And because we are blessed that we have a full production, so we have 3 full-time editors here, we have a whole production team, whole group of media buyers and planners, and obviously directors kind of overseeing it all. And we're just intensely all over it, to be honest with you. So what I found when I was a client is that when you're being pitched, you get all the big guns in the room when you're being pitched, and all the nice croissants and all of that. But then actually what happens is, as soon as they win the business, then you're handed on to a kind of group of graduates. They are kind of pretty green to the whatever agency they're working in. And if you're all coming, if you're a client like I was working with my dad, where, it literally feeds your family, and if things are going wrong, it's kind of catastrophic, and, they just can't really handle it. And so what we do here is, when we win clients, I just look at every single client sales report every single day, always have done. And I don't just look at them with a cursory eye. I make sure that, why is that happening, and why is this happening? And there's, several senior people doing that every day to make sure that it's going as well as it can. It's interesting, the agency model is really under stress at the moment, especially I'm sure you're aware of that, in the big kind of global agencies laying off a lot of people. And so I'm not quite sure where that's all heading, but we're the antithesis of all that. It's really about, we have a great kind of, the mantra we really live by is spend as little as possible to find out as much as possible. And as I said, if it doesn't work, then we're the first to say, don't carry on. We really don't want to take people's money when they're because what you don't want to do in this business, you don't want to fall in love with what you're doing. You've got to be very, very data driven about the whole thing. And if it's not working, it's not working. And it's a brutal business, the DRTV one, Stefan, in the sense that lots of things, you either are kind of winning or losing. We can things that are kind of at the margin, we can make them work harder through optimization. But if it's a real, it just doesn't work for whatever reason, then, you've got to stop. And you've got to regroup, and you've got to do something quite different, like change the pricing or change the offer, or, it can't be at the kind of, at the margin. It's got to be kind of right at the center of the offer to make that work. And again, we're here to give that advice, but understand if, people don't want to do that as well.
Reminds me of an old guest that I had. He was talking about tech, but it actually it marries off to what you just said then. He said, is date the tech, never marry it. And it's similar to what you said then. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can't, don't marry it, because you might need to change. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and you need to be. As we always just say, just follow that data. One of the good things in this industry, and so a few years back in April 23, there was a real correction in the DRTV airtime markets in a positive way, for in that the cost of it just plummeted by about 30 or 40% overnight, and it hasn't recovered since, and it looks like it's going to be like that for the future. So actually, that in itself kind of de-risks our clients quite heavily. And so most of the things we're doing at the moment, thankfully, are working. And that's really, I would say, broadly down to the cost of airtime is so inexpensive. However, I would caveat that by saying that if you're targeting a young audience, TV, linear TV, and we only, by the way, can make DRTV work with linear at the moment, it's the product really has to be targeting a quite a mature audience. So TV has changed very significantly in the last few years, and I think it will continue to do so.
Actually leads me on nicely to my next question, where I was going to say, what are the biggest trends that you're seeing inside the market?
Well, I mean, the biggest trend or a systemic change was really this thing that happened. So what happened was during COVID, everyone was kind of, signing up to subscription video on demand platforms, primarily Netflix and Amazon Prime. That had two very profound impacts, which was TV for the younger audiences during that period as well. So the prized audience in TV always used to be kind of 18 to 34-year-old adults because they're early adopters, and the idea being, they would kind of stick with your brands as they grew older. That audience has basically left linear TV and they've gone to TikTok and all the other tech, young playing YouTube as well and things like that. The other effect it had was that TV, which is a very big broadcast medium still in this country, meant that the whole audience had kind of got older, but we'd always been targeting an older audience. So TV works on the model of what's called it's called a station average pricing mechanism, but what that really means is supply and demand. And so what happened post this announcement by Barb, who are the people who measured TV in April 23, was that you had a huge amount of supply coming in terms of airtime availability, but only to a certain mature audience, and demand had decreased for those brands, so younger brands and retail in particular, because they were kind of struggling with COVID as well. So the cost of airtime just dropped very significantly, and it hasn't really recovered. So in relation to the trend, it's almost more than that. It's almost like the industry or the airtime market has completely decreased in relation to the overall cost and the supply aspect. That's maintained itself. TV industry, so Ofcom produce a report every year called Media Nations, which is a kind of summary of all communications, but TV in particular. And what that really shows is that TV is kind of maintained over the last few years, since 23, when that announcement was made, in relation to the who watches what. In relation to the trends, to answer that question, what's coming out, you might have heard a lot about connected TV and CTV and these kind of new platforms. Interestingly, for our world, they have not really. We've run a number of tests on those platforms, including YouTube and lots of other kind of channels that are specialised in this area, and they don't work. They don't work for our business model. However, in the kind of generic, kind of wider TV market, the reason why those channels are growing are what's called fast channels as well, which are essentially content channels which are supported by advertising, but normally on platforms, so like Samsung TV and things like that. So that the way that works is you go into Samsung TV, then have a list of about 200 channels which are only broadcast within that environment, and that's supported by advertisers, but they are quite specific in relation to the audience they're going after. So, for example, they have Stephen Bartlett's 24/7 Diary of a CEO channel, which is obviously targeted at younger people to a degree, and other things like that. The problem with those channels, though, in our experience, is that they're not Barb rated, so they're not independently audited in terms of how many people are watching them. But actually, much more damaging from our point of view is that the cost per thousands are about 20 times more expensive than linear TV. So it's not at the margin. And the idea behind all of that, Stefan, which has never really worked out as far as we can see, is that although VOD, so video on demand channels like 4OD and ITVX and all those kind of things, the idea being they're much more targeted at the audiences that you are being served up to effectively. But actually, that doesn't, in our experience, outweigh how expensive they are, i.e. they're way too expensive on cost per thousand, and the targeting doesn't compensate enough in relation to how it works on linear TVs. I mean, where this is all heading, I mean, it's interesting. TV is, I go to quite a lot of conferences and stuff about what's going on both in this country and around the world about TV as well. And what you find is that, everyone seems to believe that CTV is going to be a much more significant part of overall viewing and therefore advertising for brands. But I don't see many DRTV advertisers on there. The only significant change, which is interesting actually, which has come about in the last year in the UK, is if you watch Amazon Prime TV now, they have a little box in the corner that you can buy stuff now on your TVs. I was actually watching TV yesterday and watching a movie or something, and in all the ad breaks for about 60% of the adverts, if you have Amazon Prime, I'm watching it through Sky Glass at home, what happens is a little box comes up in the corner. It says if you want to buy it now, you can do it with your remote control, and then what happens actually is you press buy, and when you open up your computer or your phone to actually buy the product, it's sitting in your shopping cart, so you actually have to press buy at that point. We think that's quite interesting because it's kind of very immediate, and the thing about DRTV is you have to make it really easy to buy stuff. If you put any barriers in the way of that, i.e. your website's not up to it, or your call center doesn't pick up immediately, your QR code doesn't link straight to the cart, or all these kind of very basic errors, is that people just don't buy, so they fall off the twig very quickly, and your conversion rate falls apart. Interesting with that Amazon thing, I think it is very interesting that there is a way now that I'm literally sitting on my sofa, I can just press buy something immediately. So that I think is the kind of future. But whether it will ever compete with linear DRTV, Stefan, my honest answer at the moment is I don't know. I hope so, because you're going to get a kind of generational change that moves more towards that. But at the moment, it looks like I'll tell you one thing that's quite interesting. If you look at, I've been doing this now. This is my 28th year, I think I'm going into. There's been lots of interesting technologies that have come during that period of my career, whether it be interactive TV or video on demand or subscription video on demand or now connected TV, and none of them have worked for DRTV over that period. You always go back to linear TV again. And interesting, you always go back to linear TV between 9 and 5:30 p.m. So it doesn't work in the evenings, so, and we work with lots of premium brands, so like, that can't be right. We only, we always advertise in peak. With DRTV, it just doesn't work like that. So there is something quite counterintuitive about it. And actually, my job as a salesman is kind of explaining all that to brands, that it's, follow this path. And if you move away from it, then it's likely your return on investment will suffer. And it's the clients we have that kind of just go along with what we say based on all our experience that typically do well.
No, that you'd have to, if I was your client, you'd have to be explaining that to me, because I just would think when everything's moving, but that it would transfer over. But do you think that you said with video on demand and these things, the price per 1,000 is very high? Do you think that's because it's relatively new, and when it matures, that it will sort of go?
Interesting. The video on demand has been around a long time. I think what was interesting about it, and we've had these discussions with the media owners, is how did they establish their pricing strategy? And nobody seems to know the answer to that, or certainly the people we deal with. And so if you're looking at something like 4OD, which is the Channel 4, which is typically the most expensive, they're selling things that, between £50 and £70 cost per 1,000, which is, literally kind of about 35 times more, 40 times more expensive than we buy airtime at. It's the same people, right? I'm always kind of saying, but if you're watching TV at home, of an evening, and you're watching video on demand, which lots of people do, one of the interesting kind of things about video on demand, though, is it's only 10% of all viewing. It's tiny, it's like, and so there is a kind of misconception about that in itself, how big it actually is. Subscription video on demand is, bigger actually in terms of the amount of households. So it's in about 20 million. There are about 28 million households in the UK, and it's in about 20 million homes. So, it's a big thing. That's with all the different platforms. But again, it's very, very expensive. So I think when we've gone to these people, we've had that discussion, we need to buy it at this level. Can you do that? And the answer is no. And I think they have a strict pricing policy. But the problem they have, if I was a media owner, the problem they've got is that what's interesting is they're staying. That thing for subscription video on demand is now flatlining. It's not increasing. If you look at video on demand, for all those platforms, ITVX and, all those ones, there's huge publicity, and they're only 10% of all viewing. So it's kind of, they're not really expanding. And so my thing would be, well, why don't you reduce the price and therefore hopefully increase the amount of advertising you're selling and the demand? Because one of the other problems with video on demand is, which again is a bit kind of unspoken in the industry, is that the ad load, as they call it. So if you watch Channel 4 over Christmas or whatever, you'll find the same adverts coming up over and over again. And the reason for that, Stefan, is that those people who advertise on those platforms are looking for what they call incremental audience reach. And what that means is that they've saturated linear TV on what's called an all-time basis, so daytime and peak, and they want to get to that discrete audience that is in that 10% group, and they're willing to pay for that because they feel like they've saturated everything else. But the problem with that is that there is only a small group of brands, and they're generally big brands like the Coca-Colas of this world, or who spend huge amounts of money across the year. So And so what then there happens is you have a limited amount of advertisers who are pursuing that strategy. So therefore you see the same adverts over and over again in the ad breaks. And after a while, you don't pay attention to it because it's, you can virtually guess what's coming up in the ad breaks. And all of this is a bit of a secret in the industry. They don't want to talk about it. And so when I go to these conferences, that isn't really talked about. What's really talked about is audience reach and the kind of planning mechanism, which is essentially a kind of numerical exercise. It's not really talking about the consumer experience. So, where that's going. I mean, what Amazon have done, you won't be surprised to hear, is that they sell their product, which I've just described, at about half that price. So they sell at about the 30 quid level, £30 cost per thousand. Still very expensive as far as we're concerned, but it's half the price of the other thing. And what that has led to, and using this new technology where you can buy off the screen, is there's just many more advertisers on there. So where that's all, I think there'll be. I think someone said to me the other day there are 400 CTV platforms available in the UK. Some of them obviously coming from international, but they are available. Some of them through TV platforms. Some of them through online platforms. And I mean, there's just going to be massive consolidation. I mean, because actually ultimately TV has to work on one of two principles. Either it's a subscription model, like subscription video on demand is, or Amazon that's obviously linked to consumer purchasing, or it's funded by advertising that then can fund the content. I mean, they're the two models. It's quite straightforward. And if you're a connected TV channel that is not being audited by Barb, the system in the UK, a bit like Nielsen in the States, then it's very difficult to determine what the value of it is. And if you're someone like us, where we can, the positive and negative thing for us to CRTV is that we can offer the media owners the ability that we can put unique URLs and unique telephone numbers on their platform specifically. But what that shows you is the return has just been dismal. I mean, absolutely terrible, despite the fact that people have told us the story that, this could be the newfangled thing. And so at the moment, what we don't want to be doing, Stefan, because we're in the client servicing business, is be selling what looks like this wonderful bit of technology, because it is a great story, because we're judged on return on investment. And then we have clients saying, well, why did we do that? Why are you advising that? So we have done that on a number of occasions over the last few years, and it's just none of it works. I don't know where that's going, but at the moment, all I can tell you is of our £20 million that we'll be spending roughly this year on behalf of clients, actually none of it will be on CTV.
Just in really, hopefully enlightened me a lot. Do you know what I mean? Also, it makes so much sense because I watch so much TV on demand. I rarely watch live TV unless it's sport. Like we were watching a film the other day, and it was the same adverts every single break. It was the exact same adverts. We could literally recite them, and now I know why. So
that's why. Yeah, it's just a market thing, and it's interesting. It's really, going back to all these fangled technologies, the technologies always sound great, but actually the experience. And I think the problem in the industry is it's not consumer focused enough. Actually, it's more kind of obsessed by tech and inching these new. So one of the new thing is that if you look at one of the interesting facts. So if you look at hardware for TVs, so Samsung and LG really dominate the market, and Samsung I think have about half of all TVs sold in this country, so 14 million TVs or something. People I think replace their TV about once every 3 years, and actually they're remarkably cheap now. If you want to get a good TV in Curry's, whatever, you can buy a really good connected TV for 300 quid. Sky Glass is a great product. Anyway, what's interesting about Samsung and LG is they now are there. They see themselves as their own. They are their own media owners, right? So the technology providers then become the media owner, and then they have all these fast channels that are exclusive to them. But again, as I said before, I just can't see it working. And again, you'll see the same thing happening again. I can virtually guarantee that the people who are, on video on demand, that small group of advertisers will be the same people buying on these fast channels, because they are brands that are not direct response oriented. They just want to get as much audience reach as they can. The story is quite plausible, in terms of how obviously you are getting to people that you wouldn't normally get through the linear network, but I mean, are they, for as far as we're concerned, they're not. And actually what is interesting about those subscription video on demand and video on demand, things is if you want to get to a younger audience, the ones that have all kind of flown the nest, if you like, from me, that's where they are. So people like you, to be honest with you, Stefan, it's like, where else you're not going to be watching linear TV in the sense that, I'm a 55 this year. I mean, I just don't watch any linear TV, and even though I'm part of the older age group because I work and, I
Mhm.
get home and I just want to see a bit of news on video on demand and go to bed. It's kind of, that's just what it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. The only time I ever see linear TV, like I say, is if I'm watching sport, is if I go around to my mother's house and she's got Corrie on, because
Yeah.
that'll be on Emmerdale. Do you know what I mean? But that before, that's where everything was. Do you know what I mean? Linear TV was everything, and now for the younger age group, and even for some of the older age groups, I mean, where people work, they're busy. You know what I mean? Like you want to be able to just watch what you want to watch
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
having to be like, oh, I missed it. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, well, yeah. And what is interesting is actually this year because there's always this kind of debate: is TV dying? And actually, that thing Cheaters that was on BBC. I mean, that got 12 million viewers or something for the final. I didn't watch it personally, but I mean, what was interesting about that is that TV can still, for those kind of tension to view things, or where people actually want to make sure they catch it as it goes out live or what have you. And it's like the World Cup this year will be massive. Again, those things you'll still get for the England games. 20 million of the 70 million population will watch that, right? And so it still can deliver those things, but it is very, very splinter. I mean, to give you some idea, on the Sky Digital platform, there are 713 channels. That's before you've got anywhere close to connect. Then you've got connected TV on top of that. Then you've got video on demand on top of that. So in a way, you've just got way too much choice. But what that does is it then undermines the viability of the TV model if you're a media owner, because actually, if your media model, and most of them are based on advertising rather than subscription, it's very, very hard to get a kind of decent sized audience. So even if you have top 10 channels in the UK, you'd be amazed how small the audiences are for each of those channels. It's very unusual, for example, in daytime to get a plus 100,000 people watching an ad break. Very, very unusual, especially with digital TV, and that's with big channels, ITV3 and things like that. They're just not that big. Whereas when you roll back when I was a kid, back in the 70s and 80s, you had 4 channels. I remember Channel 4 being introduced in the 80s. But before that, then you just had these huge audiences, and I think if you look at the industry, it struggles to kind of sometimes keep up with the commercial, and that's why you're seeing all the big media owners really struggle. I mean, it's interesting. The big agencies are losing lots of staff because the brands are kind of losing their appetite so much for linear TV. I think that's part of the problem, and a lot of them doing their own digital media buying. And then the media owners are really struggling because the only way they can make it work is by investing more into content, and content is really expensive. So you've kind of got this ever kind of diminishing circle. And to be honest, we as an agency just take full advantage of that.
But you're so right. You say like from going from like 3 or 4 channels to 700 channels, people's attention's just divided. You know what I mean? So it makes perfect sense. So, what's working well, and where do you still feel slight friction at Smart Response?
Well, what's working well is kind of what we're doing because of the the low cost of media. I mean, interesting from a creative point of view, I think we've made something like 2,800 adverts or something daft in our careers in the organisation I've been involved with to date. So creatively, we do everything from 30-second adverts up to 30-minute infomercials, and in production and media buying. I think the friction is kind of how do we. So linear TV is inevitably, as you get generational change, is going to get a little bit smaller as it goes on. But interesting, that decline you hear about TV is about 2 to 3% compound per year. And actually in the older audiences, in some ways, for example, if you're really old, you actually watch more TV this year than you did last year. But the thing that kind of, the challenge for us, I guess, is kind of, as we've discussed, how do we get into the new dawn of TV? And not new dawn, but, how do we, with all these new channels, assuming that some get some traction and they get some bigger audiences, and maybe video on demand gets a more sensible pricing strategy, where do we fit in all of that? And I think that is the friction for me. We've got a very clear approach that is very effective in linear TV, and we have grown that significantly in recent years to get to where we are. I think we can continue growing on that path because there are lots of brands, and linear TV broadcast is still a big deal in relation to the amount of audience it does attract, albeit very splintered. So I think that, but the bigger challenge, I guess, is that. And do one of the bigger challenges, I think, is regulation. So TV is the TV we do is all Clearcast approved advert. Everything goes through the regulator. script and screen, and then only then can we book airtime once we've had it cleared through the independent regulator. And that applies to everyone in the UK. My bigger concern is actually that social media, how unregulated that is, and how, I mean, I've got lots of concerns about social media per se, society, and from a societal perspective, but I think from a commercial perspective, because it is such a Wild West environment in relation to, so for example, the claims that we make on TV, the claims you make on social media, you could never make on TV a lot of the time. You know, in terms of the video content they make or what they say the product can do and all of that, and worse in other countries, but bad in the UK. And so that's a kind of threat. If you look at this conference I went to recently, I mean, for the digital media and the big, you know, obviously the big platforms, Meta and Google and all the others, they are just eating the TV media budgets for lots of brands incrementally year on year. And I thought that would have slowed down, but actually it looks like it might be speeding up again. And I guess for us, it's kind of, will that affect us? At the moment, it doesn't, by the way, because we've got this model that's quite unique. But you know, in the future, it depresses me how big social media is a bit in terms of daily consumption for consumers. But I think it could have an effect. And what's interesting, if you look at people like Amazon and Amazon in particular, but Netflix too, is that, you know, how they're running these big sporting events. They've got the Premier League now at Christmas, and they've got the Tyson fight, you know, and all these kind of quite big opportunities to view events, and they're encroaching on, you know, everything in terms of content. You know, where does that end up? I'm not quite sure. So I think for us, in terms of where, you know, we look ahead, but not too far. I think for the next few years it'll be fine. We don't have any immediate concerns. You know, I don't say that proudly that, you know, our £20 million media spend will be entirely on linear TV. I say that, but out of necessity. And I would much prefer that we were diversifying into these other areas, but only they have to be viable for our clients. Otherwise, we can't do it. Where that will lead, Stefan, you know.
Especially when it comes to like what you're saying about social media, because so many people use it,
Yes.
and like the ads come up, and their guard is down. Do you know what I mean? So they're much more easy to be like, they're already on their phone. They're already just 2 clicks. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like, and especially with, you know, they definitely, I agree with you. You know, when you see ads on social media to ads on TV, there's a massive difference. And I look at some ads when I see them on my Instagram and things, and I automatically feel like scam. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not all ads, do you know what I mean? I'm not saying like all of them. There's some really good ones, but some of them come up and you can just tell by like how it's made and what the claims they're trying to make. And you just are like, that's not going to do it. And you're so right. You know, you could not put that on TV, but you definitely can by the looks of things. You can see things like, you know, like that on social media. And you have to do so much more sort of like background into it before you buy it. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like on TV, you were kind of like, you have that trust already built up. But on social media, you have to, if it's selling a product anyway, especially, do you know what I mean? You have to definitely like do your research.
Do you know, I bought, you know, the greatest consumer ever, but I'm kind of quite wary about most things. And I just, and you know, instantly from there on in, if I ever buy anything, which I don't really that often, but if I do, I always look into the company. Are they real? You know, are they on Company's House? Do they have reviews? And actually a lot of the time the reviews are terrible.
Yeah.
And so that you can see some really nice, you know, garments and clothing. You kind of think, oh, I like that. Looks nice. I would like, and then you look into it and then people just say the quality's terrible, and, you know, it took 6 weeks to arrive and it was the wrong size and all this kind of thing. And you're right about one of the things about TV, and there's some, you know, great research around it, which we use, you know, again, in our pitching process, is TV really is trusted, and it's trusted for the right reason, that it's really well regulated. You know, if you have an advert in the DRTV world that's cleared in the UK, that is seen as the gold standard. So if you put it in, whereas honestly, most of the stuff we see from the US, and we work with some American companies, you know, it's just all of it has to be amended. And, you know, I don't think I've ever seen an American advert that we've, you know, brought into the UK that hasn't had to be quite substantially rewritten or re-edited or both, to ensure that it can get to the standard of what we require in the UK. And so I find that really scary in social media, and I was a victim of a scam. You know, you just kind of go, well, you know, we can all fall for it.
I feel like everybody has a story like what you said then. I don't feel like it's just you, because I've been scammed by things. My fiance bought me something before, and it came and it wasn't it was like a brand, do you know what I mean? And it wasn't that
Yeah,
brand, do you know
yeah,
what I mean? It was like stuck on. So I feel like everybody has a horror story, do you know what I
yeah,
mean, to do with that.
yeah.
So Pete, could you walk me through your client acquisition process? You said to us earlier that you that's what you're actively doing.
Yes.
So could you walk us through
Yeah,
that?
sure. So my job is to basically land the clients that we have on an ongoing basis. And so what we do, I work with a new business guy who actually we do a lot of it on the phone unusually. So we did use one of those companies where, you send an email a week over 10 weeks, and we did that for quite a while, pre-COVID actually, during that phase. That worked quite well, but then everyone was doing it. So we all get inundated with those emails. So we stopped doing that. And then I do some of it proactively. So we kind of go, right, we're interested in that particular client, or we'll go after them through LinkedIn or email. But now for the last 3 years, we've worked with a company who specialize in new business. And what they do is we'll say, right, we're going to go after travel or household goods or whatever it is. We get the great thing about Barb is you can see exactly what all the other advertisers are doing through a technology called Tech Edge, which we use here at Smart Response. So we kind of look at what other people are doing. You can do it by sector, see who's doing what. Typically, because most brands do 30-second advertising, typically don't do 30-second advertising. But interesting, with our biggest clients, they often use a network agency to buy the 30-second, and we do 3-minute as a standalone agency. They just employ us. We have no contact with their network agency. They just, employ us to do our thing. So then what we do is we have a guy who sets up meetings with only CEO and director. And the reason for that is that what we're selling, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, we're selling a direct sales channel. We're not selling we look like we're marketers in TV. We're not really. We're salespeople using the medium of TV. To get that very commercial message across, then normally you have to do it at quite a senior level. So what normally happens is the guy puts me in touch with, he sets up a Teams meeting, which only I attend with the CEO or the marketing director of that company. By that point, we've done quite a lot of research into them, so we know what they're doing in terms of their other marketing. I pitch them like this on something similar to this for about half an hour, explain what we do. I then follow it up with an email, quite a comprehensive email with our credentials, how we would go about it, what it would cost roughly. And then if they're interested, we then go into a formal pitch process, which takes us 2 weeks. And what we do, it's a bit unusual as well, as we put together a full script and storyboard for the DRTV advert, full media buying plan, full campaign, but it's all very bespoke and looks great, I think. And then of those, we convert about 75% of those. So once we've got to that level in the funnel, but I think what we do is essentially we make that process as quick. Normally from the point of having a discussion with them, we're pitching them within 2 weeks with this bespoke document, so it's pretty quick. And of those, people sign up normally pretty quickly, because DRTV, to do it properly, you do need to spend about £30,000 on the test in terms of airtime, and then to make an advert, depending on whether they've got content or not, is everything from kind of 10 to 50 grand, depending on what it is they want to do. So it's quite a meaningful decision, but the upside is huge, in terms of so we always say to everyone, you really need to do it. I've learned that as well working with my dad. You need to do it properly. There are lots of people out there, Stefan, who do very inexpensive adverts and very small amounts of media buying for the test. Most, if you look at them, I always ask people, and how many of those continue to be on TV? To give you some idea, we launched 9 new clients last year, and 8 of them are still on TV with us from last year alone. And so, that's essentially how we do it. But interesting, what we are selling to everyone, whether they're, multi-billion turnover companies or one member, everyone is a 1-month test. That's all we want, just to demonstrate in that 1 month. And normally what happens is after about 7 to 10 days, people want to continue. And
so the company, the guy that you help you get your leads, he just kind of like does the outreach for you, speaks to the companies, and then kind of like books them in your calendar.
That's exactly it. And what he's really good at, yes, it's exactly it. So he just sends me a Teams meeting invite for later in January or whatever. He doesn't attend that meeting, but what he's great at doing is or his company's very good at it. They're very qualified leads. So I've worked with new business people before, and they're like, "Who are you?" You turn up, what do you do? Whereas everyone that I'm speaking to, they really are very gemmed up on what we do. And what that means is they generally are interested, hence why the conversion rate is pretty high at that point. We have a strategy whereby, what we do quite well is the research that we do internally, which I do as well personally, is quite in depth in relation to who we're going after. So I provide that research to him, and then it's over to him to, what he's a diamond at doing. I don't know quite how he does it, is he gets through to all these CEOs and he gets to talk to them, and he's a whiz at getting people's numbers and stuff. But interesting, it's all done on the phone, and then he'll do a quick follow up. So it's really old school way of doing it, but it's really, I must say, we started working with him in 23, just when this change in the airtime market, and his company's been a really big part of our success.
It sounds like you've got a good working relationship there. Like, do you know when they book onto a meeting, do you have any type of like sales asset that gets sent to them before they turn up on a call to you?
No, so what we do is we have the call. So the Teams meeting gets booked in. We have a call like this, lasts about half an hour normally. I then follow up that day with a very detailed email, which has got our credentials, or some client success stories, but a very detailed email explaining exactly what we do, how we go about it, what the pitch process is, how much it costs, how quickly we can do that. And what then normally happens, Stefan, is the people who come back to you and say, yes, I'm interested, they're the ones we convert. The ones where you get alarm bells is you send them all that stuff, you hear nothing, they're kind of vaguely interested. The problem we have is that, we employ storyboard artists. I mean, we really go to town on the pitch document. It's normally about 30 slides long, completely bespoke. And we write it ourselves, the directors, with other support with the team. And so it's an expensive process, but we know it's worth doing because the conversion rate's high. Interestingly, we don't really, when we pitch, one of the interesting things since COVID's opened up, if you can be in front of people in person, my God, the conversion rate is so much higher. And so again, when things opened up in 23, that really opened up from COVID, then that was very beneficial to just the growth of it, because we could go and see people again. So I will travel far and wide to go and see someone in person, because it's just that much more worthwhile in terms of their understanding of it. And I think Teams can be a bit prohibitive sometimes in really kind of getting your message and the kind of feeling of it all across.
Yeah, sales especially, it goes like this. I feel like you have the phone, then you have the Teams, and then you have in meeting, and each one you go across, you're going to have a higher level of conversion rate.
That's exactly right.
Because you can get your more of your emotion across, your feelings, and
of course,
and like, do you know what I mean, that type of thing. So I'm guessing like the guy before he gets you meetings booked, he probably tells them as much about you to get them to
I mean, I think to be honest with you, I've never been on one of those calls, what he's doing, but all I can tell you is that we started working with him, as I said, kind of up to 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and he was just giving us really good one of the problems we had before was when you're sending out those squillions of emails and stuff. I mean, we were sending out 400 emails a day or something daft, with those things, is you're getting lots of people who are kind of a bit interested, but they're not really, and they don't really get it. And so what he seems to do is to really qualify these people to understand. So he's a very, very able salesman, but in a very kind of nice, non-pushy way, as far as I can gather. And so when, those conversations seem to be quite verbose and kind of thorough, because by the time that I get to speak to them, they've got a very good idea that I can just rattle through that JML story. They understand that. They understand what we do as an agency. Obviously, I've been selling for many years, so you kind of, our patter is quite good. And I try, what used to bore me senseless when I was a client, you have someone come in and say, I'd always say to people, how many slides you got? I've got 96. I'm not going to sit through that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, cut to the point. And so we always say to everyone, it's a bit like when we do the full pitch, I always say to everyone, it will last 45 minutes maximum, including questions, and we'll be gone. And by the way, we'll send you the presentation straight after we get back to the office or on the train or whatever, and come back to us as quick as you can. And I think what I was always amazed by when I was a client, on the client side, is that you'd have these people have these fantastically boring presentations banging on. I mean, who wants to sit through 96 slides? I mean, it's just crazy. And then and then they wouldn't come, and then they wouldn't chase you up, or they wouldn't come back to you. And so we try and make that whole process really as slick as possible. We can sometimes sign people within a week to 10 days from meeting them to signing. And I think also, what it's really core about is a transparency thing. We just answer everything very honestly. We only engage with clients that we fancy, because actually when we make money, interesting, Stefan, is out of media buying on a long-term basis. So unless we get it to work as in the test phase, we're not going to make any money out of tests. I mean,
No.
it's not sustainable. We are very we're not in a formal partnership with anyone, but we are very, very invested in making it work intensely as hard as we can. Yeah, we have to.
And so the longer term partnership is what you're
Yeah.
actually trying to get, and the way you do that is by producing results. So that's how that working relationship sort
Yeah.
of works.
Yeah, it's really it's exactly
And
it.
also, when you said about, and like the 96 slides, I feel like people respect you more when you respect their time as well.
Of course.
Do you know what I mean?
Of course, and just be, our thing is really, as I said, client driven, because we sat there with our mouths open, kind of, hoping that meetings would be over as quick as possible. So I think people, we are quick at everything we do, every aspect of what we do. We have to be, but that pitch bit in particular, and also we put an awful lot of energy and focus into doing that to the best of our abilities. Every lead that comes in, we really go for it on every document, and obviously they get incrementally better every time. You get slightly better at pitching every time, but it's it's something we really care massively about, and and making sure. Well, one thing I would say is that if we have campaigns and sometimes things don't work, we really feel it. Because it reminds me of how I felt when I was a client. It makes you feel almost sick actually when things don't work, because we were spending that money and the agency never seemed to care. They just wanted to get their invoice paid, where we were like suffering hugely. So, and I think what clients like with us is they can see that we're not putting any of that on. We feel it intensely and we want to make it right. And it's important.
Yeah, no, definitely is important. I feel like it's a disconnect if not.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So my last two questions.
Yes, sir.
Is where do you want to be in the next 12 to 18 months? In terms of business?
Do you know, I'd really like to be, it's a good question, in the next year. We've grown very quickly in the last few years. So we've kind of had, massive growth for the last 4 years in a row. And that's been more staff and more everything, but more importantly, more clients. And what I'd really like to do, to be honest, is deliver to the same standard on a much, last year we turned about 12 million, this year be about 20. If we can deliver to that same standard across that client base, also our growing client base, just launch some new big ones, and deliver it to that level at the same kind of with the same intensity and accuracy, that would be a massive win from our point of view. I think for us the bigger question is how big can we take this? And what I'd like to be able to do is just all of us to kind of maintain our lifestyle balance. So we all leave here at 5:30 every day and keep that going, because that's really important to keep staff and keep everyone happy. And then, hopefully get into some of these other areas, Steph, that we've talked about, and make DRTV profitable in kind of other ways, that we're not just doing what we do at the moment. And that means kind of work with other technologies and other things, but it must work. We're lacking in case studies from those new platforms, and it'd be nice to move into those areas.
Yeah, no, definitely interesting you say about work-life balance as well, because I feel like that's such an overlooked thing. When people think about success, they often overlook that, if you're spending 90% of your time in the office, then does that qualify as success? Marginally, like in margins it does, but obviously in lifestyle it doesn't. So it's very interesting that you said that.
No, and actually we all, the three of us, when we launched this, always had that view. We've all got children and partners, and also for our staff, we just want to make sure that everyone's treated well. And so I'm really pleased to say we've managed to do that throughout the 10 years, and we continue to do so as we go into 2026. So I think that's really important, and so keep that going.
Yeah. So Pete, my last question is, if you could wave a magic wand and fix one thing in your business, what would it be and why?
It would be the pricing in those other new platforms.
Yeah, I just thought you would.
It really would be. If that could be centered around, if they could be viewed as being a more viable DRTV platform for agencies like us, that would be a great thing. But otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought that would be on the forefront of the answer after our conversation. But thank you so much for coming on.
Problem.
I've loved every minute of it. I learned so much in this hour. Do you know what I mean? Where can people, if anybody is listening and they want to reach out to you and work with you, where can they do that?
Okay, so our website is www.smartresponse.tv, and my personal email address is PeteMills, one word, @smartresponse.tv, and my mobile number, if people ever want it, is 07826 929 650, and I pick up every call.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody that's viewed, listened, please like, comment, subscribe, send to a friend, send to anybody that you thought, you think that would, would be helpful to listen to this podcast. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. All the
Thank
best.
you.
Bye-bye.